Happy Sunday, Valley UU. I am Laura Gustafson, the Congregational Administrator, and these are the announcements. We will be having a congregational conversation on April 11th, looking forward into the future. So mark your calendar for congregational conversation on April 11th. Choir will be singing the Alleluia Chorus for Easter. If you are interested in singing in the choir, please contact Katie at musicdirector@vuu.org. Also, we are still looking for volunteers for the membership committee, and if you are interested in that, please email minister@vuu.org. All other information is available at the happenings, in that weekly happenings on the website at vuu.org. There is also a link in the happenings if you need to have an announcement made. So look for the link in the happenings to send in your announcements. Thank you.
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. And it's not just beautiful because these beautiful trees and flowers are here. It's beautiful because you are here. I'm Fred Weldon, the interim minister here for this spiritual community, and together with my fellow neighbors, members who are taking part in this worship service, singing, teaching, organizing. I'm looking at people like Lib Bean and Blake Hyman and others, all of whom make this worship service possible, but you make it worship. You make it worship by taking this hour and making it a place of meaning and value to yourself and others. The buildings, these are not our sanctuary. We are the sanctuary, and whenever we gather, we are together in time, if not in place. So here we are in our sanctuary of time, and we are about to begin our worship. So I'm going to ask Noel Hyman to gather us together by lighting the chalice.
If you have a chalice nearby that you would like to light, please light it now. And then join me as we together say our words of commitment to each other. We kindle this flame, symbol of our faith, for the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of love, which calls us to work for justice.
Good morning, everyone. I am Marcy Boder, and I'm the director of the Faith Formation Ministry here at Valley UU. If you have any children in your house, now is the time to gather them in front of your device. We'll have our story in just a minute. I wanted to let you know that the Pastoral Care Associate this week is Carl Anderson, and you can reach Carl by using the email pastoralcare@vuu.org, or you can send a private chat using the chat messaging at the bottom of your screen. Make sure you look for Carl's name and not sending it to everyone. The chat is restricted during the prayer meditation time and the sermon, so feel free to post your joys and concerns before and after those parts of the service. So we have a special time for all ages today. Our tech supervisor, Blake Hyman, is going to be reading our Time for All Ages story, which is Eloi, the Existential Donkey. The author, Ben Creighton, is a friend of Blake's. Ben wrote the book after his brother's sudden death at age of 27. Eloi, the Existential Donkey, tells a story of grief and loss with respect and sensitivity. The book is not yet available for sale, but I will send an update in the happenings when it is available. Enjoy. Thank you, Blake.
Eloi the Existentialist Donkey, written by Ben Creighton, illustrated by Caroline Arcabaccio. Eloi loved to listen to the birds sing. He tried to sing too, but what came out was a donkey bray. Hee-haw! One day, a strange man named Haffy came to Old Lady Big Rock Mountain. Haffy had a magic wand called a flute that made a sound like a bird song. Eloi asked to borrow the flute. Squawk! Haffy laughed. It takes hard work and practice, he said. I'll teach you. Every day, Eloi practiced with Haffy's flute. Every day, he got better and better. One day, as Eloi was playing the flute, a rock slide came and buried Paige and Haffy. Eloi and his mother and father worked hard and dug them out. Paige's leg was twisted. Haffy's head was hurt. Eloy's mother wrapped bandages around them and asked Old Lady Big Rock Mountain to heal them. All that night, Eloy sat and played his flute softly over Paige and Haffy as they slept. The next morning, Paige's leg felt better. She said, "Your magic music healed me, Eloy." But Haffy's head was still hurt, and he would not wake up. Eloy's father said that Haffy had died in the night. Eloy's mother said, "Old Lady Big Rock Mountain has taken Haffy to live with her. He will be happier now." That night, Eloy could not sleep. He walked away from where his mother and Paige slept and found his father waiting for him. Eloy asked, "How can Old Lady Big Rock Mountain have taken Haffy to live with her? He's still here. He's just not moving around anymore." Eloy's father sighed. "I don't think Old Lady Big Rock Mountain took Haffy to live with her. His arms and legs and head are still here, but the part that made him Haffy is gone." "But where did he go?" Eloy asked. Eloy's father said, "I remember the world before you were born, Eloy. Where were you then?" Eloy didn't remember. Eloy's father said, "One day there was nothing, and the next day there was you. That's what happened to Haffy, but the other way around. One moment there was Haffy, the next moment there was nothing, except for one thing. When Haffy was alive, he told us stories of his home. He taught you to play the flute. Those things did not go away because Haffy's gone. That's what's left of Haffy in the world now, Eloy. Not the arms and legs and head and heart that aren't him anymore. You." The next day, Eloy packed a sack full of food. He hugged his mother and sister goodbye and promised to visit and set off to travel the world. Everywhere he went, he would play on Haffy's flute. Whenever he met someone new, he would tell them stories of his friend Haffy and of his family who still lived on Old Lady Big Rock Mountain. And sometimes, when he met a little boy or girl who wanted to learn, he would teach them to play the flute too.
Thank you, Blake. What a wonderful story. Good morning. My name is Katie Seifert. I'm the Director of Music Ministries, and I too welcome you. For those who are new to us this morning, in lieu of Women History Month, I've been selecting music from various women composers, and this morning I have done it again. Our opening hymn, Just as Long as I Have Breath, which is number 6 in our gray hymnal if you have it, is written by Alicia Carpenter. Alicia Carpenter was a Unitarian Universalist professional singer and songwriter born in 1930. Her words in this beautiful hymn that we'll sing this morning invite us to say yes to life, to love and truth. Just as our breath promises life, life also promises death. So in celebration that we all still have the gift to say yes to life this morning, let's sing together on this beautiful hymn.
With
Welcome to Valley Unitarian Universalist congregation. I'm Noelle Hyman, and I'm your worship associate for today's service. We're happy you're here to commune with us in our temporary virtual space. Please know that whoever you are, whatever you believe, however you like to dress or not dress for virtual meetings where you can keep your video off, you are welcome here. If you are newer to our services, we'd love to meet you directly afterward when we'll have an optional breakout room or many optional breakout rooms that people can choose to join the chat with a smaller group of people. But if you're newer, we'd love for you to not join a breakout group. Instead, we ask you to stay where you are and decline the breakout group, and you'll be left with the interim minister, Dr. Reverend Fred Weldon, and a few others who would like to get to know you. And you'll have a chance to ask questions that you might have. Easter is on its way, but before we can get to Easter with its symbolism of rebirth, we'll work first through the subject of death today, which Reverend Weldon has chosen for our service. When I first transitioned into not holding religious or supernatural beliefs, it was a time of exploration for me because there was this amazing unpacking of concepts that had all revolved around assumptions that I no longer assumed. I remember that first moment realizing my new beliefs meant an existence without me at some point in it. As long as I've been alive, of course, I have been here. And I had that initial moment of wanting to push back at the idea of a world that didn't include my forever existence. But then I thought, is it sad to realize billions of years of life passed on Earth before I was born without me there? And of course, not at all. Life after me will not be any different than life before me, other than I will have left an impression on the people in my sphere. But what can we say to our younger children if we don't believe in an afterlife? When mine were still small, I wrote an article on this for a secular humanist e-magazine for which I was a monthly columnist. And this article was then published in a book called Parenting Beyond Belief. There's a whole section on death where one of my articles sits. And I thought I'd share the name of that book if you're interested in looking it up as a possible source for secular parents. It's got all kinds of subjects and then that whole section on death. I'm going to paraphrase some of my article on the subject of death. My 3-year-old at the time of the article, Aiden, spotted a yellow butterfly that lay dead on the parking lot of my doctor's office. I paused to let my little Mr. Curiosity examine it. He complained, "It's dead," and it concerned him. I suppressed my initial inclination to comfort Aiden with the words, "Yes, it's dead and in heaven now." Instead, I explained that his brain had stopped working. His life is all done now. My concept of death has reincarnated into an entirely new animal since leaving religion, or my former, excuse me. Years ago, my father-in-law made a vocal recording of the story of his conversion from Judaism to Mormonism. I transcribed that story for him, and I remember how his reason for considering Christianity made an impression in my mind. At that time, the war in Vietnam was alive and killing many of America's youth. The war stopped the breath of a number of my father-in-law's friends. He said in his recording that the Reformed Jewish temple that he grew up in didn't provide many answers about death, that most Jewish people focus on the memories of the person. They emphasize that what you are after death is what you leave behind for those who are still alive. This answer was inadequate for my father-in-law at his time of loss. Such a concept of death was foreign to me as a Mormon. The explanation impacted me because Mormons and other Christians place so much emphasis on life after death. My thoughts of death growing up were images of enhanced life. I now embrace the concept my father-in-law abandoned. Transferring the concept to my children was a task I avoided for a long time. My kids held on to their previous idea of heaven when we left our religion. At some point, my oldest, Blake, realized there was a dilemma between my assertions that there are no such thing as ghosts and his belief that people become spirits when they die. Aren't spirits actually ghosts? He asked me. Well, yes, I said. Some religions say we become spirits, and if that were true, then there would be ghosts. But From all the scientific searching, I told him, there's no evidence of it, so I can't find any reason to think there are actually ghosts or spirits. And I only rely on evidence, I told him. Later, the kids asked about death, wondering if people are sad or hurt when they're dead. I told them that when someone dies, their brain shuts off. So they can't be sad and they can't feel pain. And we have all the memories of that person and the things they did and how they made us feel. It's important to experience the mourning and the sad feelings of missing a loved one, but we can also celebrate their life with all its joys and difficulties. We can share stories, look at pictures, laugh at the quirks and the unique traits of the person we love and miss. Such a focus at the time of a death could and should give our children an appreciation for the significance and brevity of life. Back at the doctor's office, as we returned to the car to go home, Aiden wanted to see the dead butterfly once more. It wasn't where we had left it, and Aiden insisted on finding it. I could have rushed him or tried distracting him with another topic, but I knew that both the ideas of a butterfly and death were important to him at this time. We eventually found the yellow butterfly where the wind had blown him a few feet away. We stared at it for a while. Looking at death from my current paradigm, I talked to Aiden about the happy life the butterfly had. Its life was over and it was short, but it was a good one. It got to fly in the sky and look at beautiful butterflies. Aiden wanted to pick it up. I was hesitant at first to let him touch a dead insect. Then I changed my mind because this was a chance for him to examine the body of a butterfly, and it was also an opportunity to look at death close up. I wanted to give Aiden associations of confidence and gratitude around death, rather than avoidance and anxiety. I handled the butterfly with its wings and passed it to Aiden. It fascinated him. We pointed to the head, the eyes, the legs, the antenna. It was time to go, but Aiden wasn't ready to leave his specimen. Again, with hesitation, I let Aiden bring the butterfly with him in the car, and we drove to the school to pick up Trinity from kindergarten. Aiden showed her the dead butterfly. My most sensitive child, Trinity, she expressed a little pity, but then said, "At least he's not sad. His brain is shut off. So he's dead, but not sad." Our children need to see us deal with death. I didn't shield my kids from it. I always had them take a real look at it with me, including when our own actual loved ones died. We cried together. We discussed how sad it was. And then I focused on the conversation. I focused the conversation on the person's life before they died. In my opinion, death is really about life. Death is a conclusion. Death as a conclusion to life makes life meaningful.
So I think I have something at home in my freezer in Michigan. It's sourdough starter, and I had to freeze it because I was going away, coming down here. And I have no idea when I go back, if when I thaw it out, it will still be alive. So that's going to be a puzzle for me because I really like my sourdough starter. It took us a long time to get together and work things out and agree on pieces. And yet there's a reality that I might find I have to start over again. Because you see, I like having a friendship with my yeast. It's a good relationship. We enjoy working with each other, or I enjoy working with them. They're not really too much aware of me. And what has this to do with the offering? Well, some years ago, a sociologist up in Canada referred to good Protestants as the frozen chosen. That is to say, those who don't do very much, but feel quite content in their location. And sometimes I think religious people are rather content. And what has this to do with the offering? Because an offering is a reminder that you are not active, you are not alive if you are not contributing to the larger good. You might be comfortable in your little frozen place. You might not be dead, but you're not very alive. Because you see, we are each needed to create what someone would call the bread of life. So when you give to this congregation, you help us feed more. And that's what we're really about, feeding each other and more. So if you can, please text, click, write, whatever you do, it matters. Thank you.
As we move into our time of centering, let's first acknowledge our breath, our current life source, and take one big breath together. Breathing in and releasing out. Again, this time filled with gratitude for what life brings and the ability our body has to carry us in that breath. Let's take one more breath. Breathing in and out. Reverend Gregolia is a Unitarian Universalist minister and a prolific musician. In a seminary class on death and dying, her assignment was to write her own eulogy, which she responded in song, writing the song, "I Know This Rose Will Open." During the pandemic, there has in sorts been a death of choirs, since the virus is easily transferred when singing together in groups. However, the pause on singing together in person has birthed virtual choirs. In collaboration with Benji Messer, the music director at UU in Central Phoenix, and the magic of sound editing from Sam Plattner and video editing from our own Izzy Hyman, thank you Izzy, we have been able to create a virtual experience of singing together. Due to the enormous amount of work, time, and money involved in creating these video choirs, Benji and I know that not every church can offer this experience. So our virtual choir has grown to include all UU churches in Arizona and their singers. Although singing together virtually will never replace the joy of singing together in person, it still has been a meaningful experience. Please allow our Arizona UU video choir singing Reverend Gregolia's beautiful song, "I Know This Rose Will Open," to center us. And as always, you are invited to sing along too.
1,000 years ago, there was a woman named Rabia al-Basri. In early life, she was sold into a brothel where she was obliged to be a, shall we say, a sexual servant to the men who came to that place. When she was finally old enough to leave, no longer being desirable, she took herself to a community of Islamic mystics known as Sufis, and there spent her life in prayer and contemplation, writing beautiful poetry. She wrote at one point, "In my soul there is a temple, a shrine, a mosque, a church where I kneel. Prayer should bring us to an altar where no walls or names exist." Think about that for a moment, about her life, about her words, and consider now those who shared her history and in the last week lost their lives because they were like her. And so our prayer today at that same altar, if we can find it, is to acknowledge our sorrow for those lost in Atlanta, for the continuing struggle against fear and hate that took those lives, for their names. We lift up in prayer Sun Cha Kim, Yong A Kue, Xiao Jie Tan, Dao Yao Fang, Delana Ashley Yaun, Hun Yong Grant, and Sun Chok Park. These women whose lives were lost because hate and fear propelled someone to a violence that is all too common. We also pause in shame that we have failed as a society to repair this legacy of racism and sexism that makes it possible for white men in America to do this. And we pause and resolve to be a community that stands with and works for those whose lives are in danger from this blight of racism and sexism. This will not be easy. It never has been. But the cause of justice is a holy one. And therefore, we have no choice. So our prayer today is that we should always be kneeling at an altar where no walls or names exist, but only souls gather in hope of being safe and sound. And that will be enough. Amen.
Amen. My grandfather, Richard Larson, was a Lutheran minister for over 50 years. He started and maintained a successful soup kitchen in the slums of Detroit, Michigan, and was one of very few ministers that fought for gay rights. He was married to a sweetheart for 63 years, was a father to 4 kids, grandfather to 10, and a great-grandfather to 11 before he passed. In his life, he exuberated love, joy, forgiveness, a fight for justice, and faith. I can't help but think of him and my own life every time I hear this next song. And not just because I tearfully sang it at his funeral, but because of the powerful words written in this song, and the example that my grandfather left me of a life truly lived to make the world a better place. May this song speak to us all this morning, and may we hear our own answers to the questions that it poses. This is Last Song, written by Daniel Nahmad.
If this is my last song, if this is my final day, if tomorrow I will be gone, what do I want to say? If this is my last song, if it's my time to go, when my body's moved on, what will I have to show? Oh, but fortune and fame, they scatter to the wind. The things that make a name just don't matter in the end. But is the world a little more peaceful? Oceans and sky a little more blue? Is humankind a little bit wiser about the good that we can do? Does the sun shine a little bit brighter where before there was only rain? If so, then I'm glad I came. If these are my last words for all of the world to hear, if all that I have ever been is about to disappear, if these are my last words, there's nothing that I need to say. I have only tried to serve. It's never been about talking anyway. So much hurt there is to heal, it's hard to understand. All I can hope to feel is that I'm doing what I can. Is the world a little more peaceful? Oceans and sky a little more blue? Is humankind a little bit wiser about the good that we can do? Does the sun shine a little bit brighter where before there was only rain? If so, then I'm glad I came. Have I given hope to the hopeless? Has a hungry soul been fed? Has a child stood a little bit taller 'cause of something that I said? Have I left a little kindness? Have I eased a little pain? If so, then I'm glad I came. For that, I'm so glad I came. If this is my last song, what do I leave behind? What do I pass on if I am out of time?
Well, here I am at the Pioneer and Military Cemetery in Phoenix, the oldest cemetery in the city. And you can see behind me some of the gravestones. These are soldiers' gravestones, including one that's a wooden marker. There are people here from the 19th century, and what's really consequential is that there are burials here of African Americans, many of them what they used to call buffalo soldiers, who served here in the desert Southwest. This seems to be a fitting place to share with you James Weldon Johnson's funeral sermon called Go Down Death. It is not about a particular biblical passage, but intended to evoke the comfort and hope that people wanted to find in death, in that time long ago when being black meant a hard life. Here is what he wrote. Weep not. Weep not. She is not dead. She's resting in the bosom of Jesus. Heartbroken husband, weep no more. Grief-stricken son, weep no more. Left lonesome daughter, weep no more. She's only just gone home. Day before yesterday morning, God was looking down from his great high heaven, looking down on all his children. And his eye fell upon Sister Caroline, tossing in her bed of pain. And God's big heart was touched with pity, with the everlasting pity. And God sat back on his throne and he commanded that tall, bright angel standing at his right hand, call me death. And that tall, bright angel called in a voice that broke like a clap of thunder, call me death. And that tall, bright angel cried in a voice, call death, call death. And the echoes sounded down the streets of heaven till it reached away back to that shadowy place where death waits with his pale white horse. And death heard the summons, and he leapt on his fastest horse, pale as a sheet in the moonlight. Up to the golden street death galloped, and the hooves of his horse struck fire from the gold, but they didn't make no sound. Up death rolled to the great white throne and waited for God's command. And God said, go down, death, go down. Go down to Savannah, Georgia, down to Yakima, and find Sister Caroline. She's borne the burden and the heat of the day. She's labored long in my vineyard, and she's tired. She's weary. Go down, death, and bring her to me. And death didn't say a word, but he loosed the reins of his pale white horse, and he clamped the spurs to its bloodless sides, and out and down he rode through heaven's pearly gates, past suns and moons and stars. On death rode, and the foam from his horse was like a comet in the sky. On death rode, leaving the lightning's flash behind. Straight on down he came. While we were watching round her bed, she turned her eyes and looked away. She saw what we couldn't see. She saw old death. She saw old death coming like a falling star. But death didn't frighten Sister Caroline. He looked to her like a welcome friend. And she whispered to us, I'm going home. And she smiled and closed her eyes. And death took her up like a baby and lay her in his icy arms, but she didn't feel no chill. And death began to ride away, up beyond the evening star, out beyond the morning star, into the glittering light of glory, onto the great white throne. And there he laid Sister Caroline on the loving breast of Jesus. And Jesus took his own hand and wiped away her tears. And he smoothed the furrows of her face. And the angels sang a little song, and Jesus rocked her in his arms and kept us saying, take your rest, take your rest, take your rest. Weep not, she is not death. She's resting in the bosom of Jesus. I grew up in a city where such things as open caskets are considered backward, maudlin. So it wasn't until I was a minister that I saw my first corpse. Let's see if we can work that out. Maybe you may have to mute my microphone on this desk here. There we go. Can you all hear me now? All right. So forgive that little technical glitch. I want to go back to the beginning and start over, okay? Life happens to us all. The phone call came out of the blue, as all such phone calls come. Robert had died. Robert was a member of the search committee that called me to my first pulpit. I dashed out to our 1961 seafoam green Chevy Impala with a broken turn signal and thundered through the backwoods of rural Massachusetts to the little farm where he lived, where he died. His was not my first funeral, but it was my first open casket funeral. Out in the countryside, old ways endure. I grew up in the city, though, where such things are considered maudlin, morbid, even backward. So it wasn't until I was an ordained minister in a pulpit that I saw my first corpse. I, in fact, helped to choose the casket and pick the grave. And I got to tell you, no course in seminary can prepare you for this. Nothing can prepare you really, for death never knocks politely, but walks right in and sits down in the middle of life. I tried over and over to find a dignified approach to that funeral, you know, appropriate, liberal, Unitarian. But so many wept, and they wept so much. So even though I tried to put on a good face, it was hard. And Bob's face was so visible there at the funeral home and there, even in my church, right below me as I spoke. An American Indian once said very matter-of-factly, death is hard to face. What he did not say that death's face is so familiar. It is your friend, your neighbor, your parent, yourself. Now we pragmatic people know it shouldn't be so hard. Death happens every day. Every newspaper has a section full of obituaries. There's not a day without one in it. Go into a supermarket and everything in there that you eat was alive and is now dead. The autumn leaves that we love so much are a festival of dying plants. Life feeds on death, death feeds on life. They belong to each other. We say it all the time. And yet there's something fundamentally jarring when death comes to call. Something that reason cannot fully dismiss or explain. So we have funerals because we need to, and we carry coffins because we must, and we dig graves and we say ritual words. A colleague who has since died, Forrest Church, said, if I were to give one simple statement of my own definition of religion, it would be this, that religion is our human response to the dual reality of being alive and having to die. That's pretty good. I like it. He was very good at that stuff. But not until this year did I find out he really didn't come up with that himself. Karl Barth, perhaps the least liberal theologian of the 20th century, actually came up with it himself. I guess it really does apply across the board. Our pride that we have in our faith is that we do not shrink from the fierce unrest, as Don Marquis calls it, the riddle of life and death. We don't pretend, we don't gloss it over, we don't smooth it with hopeful imaginations. But let's be honest, only a very few can stand the heat of death all the time. Though we scorn talk of heaven and hell, when it comes to death itself, we tend to keep that casket cover closed. Ernest Becker wrote a book many years ago, back when I was a young man, called The Denial of Death. And he says that human culture is itself built on the denial of our mortality. Everything presumes that we will be around forever. And not just religion, mind you, every part of our culture. I thought of the words of William Saroyan, a great writer, who, as he faced death, said, "Everybody's got to die, but I've always believed an exception would be made in my case." Yeah, it's funny. I agree. Well, if Becker is right, that may explain why when death really does come, it is not only momentous, but strange and foreign. And what a dilemma. To face death honestly is hard. It's a black hole into which everything falls and from which nothing ever escapes. But denying death may make it harder to face when it really does come, and it always does. Is there any way to approach death honestly? Back in 2005, I was invited to address a high school class at our local Christian high school, knowing full well what sort of minister I was, so it was no surprise. And I had a great time. They asked wonderful questions, and I was never invited back. A few weeks later, though, after I gave it, I received a letter from a young woman in that class. To think she's over 30 now and probably has children of her own is suddenly startling as I tell you this. Anyway, she wrote saying, and I'm quoting her now, "I am so curious about your view of the afterlife." She went on, "In class, you mentioned that you do not know what is going to happen after you die. When you have a funeral, what do you say to the people who lost a loved one? How can you comfort them when you do not know what happened to their loved ones?" This young woman is asking the question everyone asks, how we face death. And the answer, in part, is in that poem you heard a little while ago. That text you heard seems rather conventional, but there is a kernel of inspiration. There you can see death riding on the white horse. Beautiful illustration. Thank you. A kernel of inspiration is buried in the midst of that rich, conventional imagery. It says, "Go down, death, go down and find Sister Caroline. She's borne the burden and heat of the day. She labored long in my vineyard, and she's tired, she's weary." Weary is what a late dear friend and clergy colleague of African American descent taught me. His name was Ewell Hopkins, and as a young preacher, he was a good Baptist. But he had a crisis of faith that cost him that pulpit, and it led him to Unitarian Universalism, and he was a member of the church I served as a student back in 1978. And when I was being installed in my second church, which was not far from that church I served as a student, I asked him to pray at the installation, and he was only too happy. He was a very wonderful older colleague and mentor. But I saw how much slower he had become in those 7 years. He leaned on his cane a little more, and he took extra time to climb the few steps to the lectern. And so afterward at the fellowship hall, while everyone's thanking me and congratulating me, I thanked him, and I asked if he was unwell. And he said, "Fred, I'm weary." That's not the same as being tired. It is a sense of being used up. In that great hymn that Dr. King loves so much, "Precious Lord," the text says, "I am tired, I am weak, I am worn." To be weary is to be worn down. A terrible car accident years before had hobbled Ewell some. One leg was now shorter than the other. He was in pretty much constant pain. And he was between 70 and 80 on that occasion in 1985. He had a right to be weary. That's why death didn't frighten Sister Caroline, says Johnson. He looked to her like a welcome friend. Yeah, weariness is a sad place, But let's go back to an earlier phrase. She's labored long in my vineyard. For those who have had to labor long and hard, death is a friend. I had a very short taste of that kind of labor when, as a young man between college and seminary, I worked on the Central Vermont Railroad as a track hand one summer. That's a glorious name for what is essentially ditch digging. It also meant pulling spikes, hauling old railroad ties in the heat of the day. And glad I was to say goodbye and return to school. And I thought of the men who were behind, for whom that was their career for their whole lives. I think that is the image we get from the poem about Sister Caroline's Born the Heat of the Day. But I don't want to say it only belongs to people who have been worn down by physical labor. Ewell's disability made him weary. I have attended to a young woman who welcomed death after years of illness. I've attended more than one young man ravaged by AIDS who let go, as Sister Caroline did. They met death as relief. And spiritual burdens can be just as wearying. Poverty, illness, worry can wear a person down. But it occurred to me that one need not to have been worn down in all these other ways. In Lifecraft, a book written by Forrest Church, he puts forth the idea that our lives are works of art. Every life, he says, is a work, a creation. And I think that's a really cool idea. And if our lives are like artworks that have a beginning and an end, that describes our lives, doesn't it? There's always, no matter how large the painting, a last stroke, no matter how long the poem, a last word, no matter how thick the book, there's got to be a last word at the book. There's got to be a final note in the song or the symphony. And that's what we want of life. We want completeness, that we've made a work of our lives. Of course, this doesn't erase the personal fear of death, which is hard to face, and believe me, I know that. And if Ernest Becker is right, we all know it, but we prefer not to talk about it. Without doubt, the religions of the world exist to smooth over that existential fear that Eloy had to deal with. Something quite clearly in the mind and heart of the young person who wrote me 15, 16 years ago. But what could I say that would be honest and yet kind, that could speak to her and those like her? I cannot say if what I wrote spoke to her, but when I feel the creeping dread of death come over me, and it does, my own words then remind me of what I'm too easily able to forget. So with gratitude for James Weldon Johnson's help, here are some of the words I shared with that young woman 16 years ago. My dear young friend, your questions are as old as the human heart. Whenever people ask about the afterlife, they're asking about the meaning of life. What good is life, we wonder, if it is all going to come to an end? Every culture and religion has wrestled with this dark angel, and each has found its own answer. I cannot say, nor can you, which one is correct. For all of us see dimly, for the ultimate meaning of life and death is not known to us. That is why we say we believe and we have faith, because we do not know. Neither of us knows that fact, whatever it is, in the same way we know how the sun seems to appear in the east and that 2 + 2 = 4. What you're asking is, how can there be faith that does not include belief in the afterlife? But even the Bible tells us that the first patriarchs and matriarchs died and were buried without any promise of going to any kind of heaven. In the book of Job, Eliphaz consoles him, saying, "You shall come to your grave in ripe old age as a shock of grain comes to the threshing floor." Much later, the writer of Hebrews in the New Testament encourages all those in the early Christian community by naming the great ones from the past who did not receive the promise that they were promised, but labored in faith. If such mighty figures as these labored without expecting eternal life, then who am I to demand it or expect it? How strong a faith is it, you might ask, if it is motivated by the desire for eternal life? What kind of a bargain is that? It was the Islamic saint Rabia who once prayed, "If I believe in thee in fear of hell, then cast me into hell." As I said, the question of death is the question of life. What meaning can life have if it is simply wiped out, we ask? Why bother trying to be good at all if there's no point? But there is a point, which is not a matter of faith. The philosopher George Santayana observed in the last century that the moment a life is over, the truth of that life begins. We are each a piece of the great truth, of the whole, part of creation, whether we notice it or believe it or not. Didn't you just say that a little earlier, Noel? The individual, finite as it is nonetheless part of a larger community of finite individuals that by themselves are very small and finite, but together are numberless. If we consider that fact, and that is a fact and not a belief, then we may realize that everything we do affects everything else. How I live adds to and changes everything else. It can be great, it can be small, it could be good or bad, beautiful or ugly, but it does change everything. And when my personal life is complete, the truth I made of that life will continue. And that for me is a very good reason to be good, to do good, to seek the true and the beautiful, because that is what I hope to leave behind. For me, this notion is as awesome as any promise of immortality. My life matters. Your life matters. I may not know exactly how or how much, but it adds to a greater whole. It is as important as a single note in a symphony that if it were absent would make it less beautiful and less complete. It would be as if a word in a great poem were suddenly left out, the brushstroke of a painting. If I do not live thoroughly, completely, and well, the tapestry of creation is poor. When death comes to someone at my church, we honor that life because it has been completed. The truth that that life has fashioned, the beauty it has added, the goodness it has forged. Yes, we feel sadness because our limited minds cannot hear that note or see that color, but the music continues. And the canvas of the universe still unfolds while we lament our personal loss. We do not lament the ultimate loss because it is not gone. In that sense, our lives, though completed, still live. And the truth we labored to create endures. There may be more than this. No one knows, but there is undeniably this. To live thus is exactly the faith that I see, not just among Unitarian Universalists, but in people like Abraham and Moses and Rabia and Simone Weil, in Albert Schweitzer and Nelson Mandela. They kept faith and labored not for some eternal life, but to live a faithful life. Not to live forever, but to live fully. And that is my prayer, to live truly and therefore truly live. To give thanks for my life by giving it to a greater life, not to earn eternal bliss, but to live eternally in the lives that come after me. That is worth living for. There may be more. But if not, this is enough. It is enough. And so may it be. And amen. Shall we sing together and add our notes of truth to the song of being?
Thank you, Reverend Fred. The song that we'll sing together to close out is by the American composer Gwyneth Walker. She is beloved by performers and audiences alike for its energy, beauty, reverence, drama, and humor. Dr. Gwyneth Walker was a faculty member of the Oberlin College Conservatory, but resigned to pursue a career as a full-time composer. And that proved to be a good decision. Her catalog now includes over 350 commissioned works for orchestra, chamber ensembles, chorus, and solo voice. So this morning, we get to hear her beautiful song, Let the Life I Live Speak for Me, by our choir before the pandemic. Please sing along if you so feel called.
Some closing words from Rabia al-Basri. She is a wonderful poet. Die before you die, said the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. I was born when all I once feared I could love. With that daunting thought in mind, a spiritual mountain to be climbed, we move forward into the days ahead. And now, Noel, can you help us close our hour of worship by extinguishing the chalice?
Yes, we'll end this beautiful service with our final words as we prepare to start a new week. Join with me as we extinguish the chalice. Though we extinguish the chalice, our connection to each other and this community remains. May its light guide us this week as we walk the path of justice, speak words of love, and fill our world with compassion until we meet again. We are about to have some breakout rooms for the end of our service. You're invited to join a breakout room. If you would like to stay for that, just stay here and you'll get a little invitation. If you're new to us and would like to meet with the Reverend Fred Weldon and maybe some others, please decline your invitation to the breakout room and you'll just stay in the same space. And please also enjoy the song that will be playing while we wait for those breakout rooms to begin. Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, folks, how are you? I don't know. It's good to see Liz. Hi.
Hi, everybody.
Hello,
Hi.
Al.
Hi, Angela and Ella.
And